all fears are illusions and you can walk right through them. What's going on, guys? I'm Dave Haas at Rise Up Rich, and today I'm talking about the concept of fear and how it really controls our lives. And the best way I can really describe this to you is just through examples. When I was a kid, I was a wild little kid. I was always running around causing trouble, and I was playing in my garage, and my dad had these big welding tanks, big acetylene tanks, and I was swinging on the hoses from those tanks, and both of those tanks fell on top of me, and I was probably only around 7, and they trapped me underneath of them. They broke my arm, my ribs. I was a mess, and I was stuck under there for about 20 minutes, just screaming for my mom, who was in the house doing laundry. Finally, she came out and found me. She amazingly lifted up these acetylene tanks that weighed a couple hundred pounds. I don't know how much they weighed, maybe 400 or 500 pounds. Lifted up these acetylene tanks, slid me out from underneath, grabbed me up in her arms, and started screaming. We lived in the county, so this is kind of funny. She was screaming for help from our neighbors, and finally one of our neighbors came running over. They could see that my arm was broken, and I was crying and obviously in a bunch of pain. They called the ambulance. They took me to the hospital. So the point of that story is, though, that created a ton of fear for me around confined spaces because I was trapped underneath these tanks for a small period of time. I began to develop claustrophobia, and I was insanely claustrophobic. Like, if I was wrestling around with my brother or something and he would pin me down, I would have a complete meltdown. Later on in life, when I started digging deeper into my spiritual growth, and I read in the book Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins, which I highly recommend you read. That book is like my Bible. I try and read it twice a year. When I read that book, and Hawkins says, all fears are illusions, and they were created to protect us, and they were created for a good reason, and that was because back in the day when we were walking around and saber-toothed tigers were trying to hunt us down, we needed fear to keep us safe. We needed fear to realize that you don't jump in the pool without an adult around. We needed fear to not walk on the edge of high cliffs, because if we didn't, we would die and we would perish. So the purpose of fear was for the evolution of the species. But now that we live in relatively safe environments where we're not putting our lives in danger, saber-toothed tigers aren't trying to hunt us down anymore, that fear is no longer necessary. And you can move right through it if you learn to face it. So once I heard this concept, I was like, I'm going to put this to the test. And being insanely claustrophobic, I started finding ways where I could test it. And I wasn't going and putting myself in coffins or anything, but I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And especially when I was out of breath, when someone would get me pinned down, I would be in the moment of that fear. And I just had to sit with it and realize that I was going to be okay. Sometimes I would tap out because the panic was overwhelming. But the more I did it, the more I became comfortable with it, and eventually I was never tapping out because someone was pinning me down. Another example of this is, I don't have a fear of heights, but I was recently kayaking up this river, and there was a spot you could climb up this tree and you could jump down into the river. So the tree was like extremely sketchy, and I'm climbing up this tree, and as I get halfway up, it was probably only about 20 feet high, but as I get halfway up, I look down and I'm like, oh my God, like this is high. The holds, like the little ladder to hold onto, is very sketchy. Some of the boards are loose, and I could start feeling the fear starting to overwhelm me, and the knees start shaking. And so I knew that fear was an illusion, and all I had to do was sit with it and let that fear go, and eventually it would pass. So that's exactly what I did. I basically stayed in that one spot on the tree, let the fear come up and let it go. Just felt the fear escaping from my body. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I was able to climb all the way to the top and jump down into the water. I had a similar experience where I was up in my attic. I was trying to do some electrical work, and I had to crawl from one big open space to a very, very tiny space. And as soon as I went to go crawl into that space, the claustrophobia came back, and I started to feel overwhelmed. My heart rate increased. My breathing became quicker. And I knew that that was just the illusion of fear. So again, I sat with it for a few minutes in the attic where the breathing wasn't good. There's insulation all over the place, but I sat with that fear. And I came to realize that after a few minutes, the fear was past, and I was able to crawl around and do all the electrical work that I needed to do. So what is the point of all of these stories? Well, The bigger fear that most of us have is the fear of other people's opinions, and that is what's holding us back from doing the things that we truly want to do, doing the things that we are aligned with, doing the things that are in alignment with our higher self. And if you can learn the technique of just pushing past that fear, you're going to be completely unstoppable, and you can achieve anything that you've ever wanted to achieve in your life. You can get aligned at the highest levels. But the reason that we don't is because of fear. So how do you get over the fear? Well, basically, I just use a meditation technique where I sit and I identify with the fear that I'm feeling. So if I'm about to start a new business, even this, for example, Rise Up Rich, where I'm putting myself out there and there's fear of what other people are going to think about these videos that I'm making, I just sit with that fear and allow it to escape. And I visualize it whichever way, works for me, and you can visualize it however it works for you. But once I release that fear, it's gone forever, and I can continue to move forward with the things that I want to accomplish in my life and align with my higher purpose. As I get more aligned and as I move through this fear, the energy increases, and I get closer and closer to achieving everything that I've ever wanted to achieve in my life. So that is how fear is controlling us, and that is how to move past it. So next time you're in a moment where you're experiencing fear, just remember, just let that fear go. It is an illusion, and you can move through it. Thanks for taking the time to watch that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you realize how fear is just an illusion now. And these are the kind of the things that I discuss with my coaching clients. So if you're interested in getting some one-on-one coaching, shoot me a message here on Facebook, and I'd be happy to talk to you about what my coaching program entails.